So there's no longer. And I'm not gonna take a class every day to say, we put it out.
Ron, if you could make,
You are a co-host.
if you could also make virtual Bethel a co-host, so I can manipulate the room from here.
Yes, I can. Hold up.
They're gonna be with her husband's brother.
Good morning, I guess, no, I'm sorry, excuse me, good afternoon, everyone.
Can you make it a little louder?
I can't, Liliana, you gotta do that on your end, I'm as loud as I can be.
Okay,
The microphone is right in front of me. And
okay,
I'm pretty loud. And it turned all the way up, so if you can't hear me, turn up your volume on your end.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, starting the slideshow. Doing the same thing, gonna share the screen. So we'll start in just a moment as friends are making their way in. If I can invite everyone who's in the room to quietly take your seats or quietly get your name tag or quietly get a drink or do all those things. So we can begin. For those of you who are at home, I want to let you know that I'm getting a message that our internet is unstable, and please bear with me because it ain't nothing I can do about it. But we're going to get started. Hello to Linda and to Robin and to Liana and to Steve and to those of you in the room. We're going to get started. So you all heard of Benjamin Franklin?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you have a favorite aphorism of his.
Penny.
That is not raising your hand, Susan. We all have our favorite aphorisms of Ben Franklin. If I asked us to go around and share them, that would eat up the whole hour. And so I'm not going to do that. But we know that Ben Franklin has this outsized role in our in American culture. If for nothing else, then he is on the most famous and widely circulated and valuable piece of currency in the entire world. The US $100 bill is the world's currency. Because as we know, it is all about the Benjamins, right? The $100 bill with Benjamin Franklin on it. Ben Franklin, of course, was a master of political theory, but he was also a master of invention, right? He was a tinkerer. He invented, some of you are wearing bifocals. Some of you received mail yesterday from the US Postal Service. Some of you went to public school. We have Ben Franklin to thank for all those things in our country and a lot more. And he was also known to be a philosopher of the human condition. And in particular, in his autobiography, he articulated a series of attributes. Anybody know how many there were in there? There were 13 attributes that he identified, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes, as being core to living a good life.
Sounds like us.
It sounds like, hang on, Margaret, we'll get there. Don't get sharp. And Franklin was, you know, he was a man of a lot of different skills, and also a lot of different people questioned his morals in a lot of ways, and he carried himself as everyone's favorite uncle, as everyone's kindly wise old grandfather. If you didn't see the miniseries starring Michael Douglas, it's worth seeing. He was excellent. My particular favorite, this is not yours to take.
Almost got it.
My particular favorite rendition of Ben Franklin, and I'm sorry I forgot the name of the actor, but was in the film production of 1776. Whoever it was that played Franklin, that was excellent. But he had this sort of wise aloofness, meaning he didn't get his hands dirty necessarily in the day-to-day of what things done. He didn't write the Declaration of Independence, but he made sure to be the one to choose the guy to do it, right? And it wasn't Adams, and it wasn't Franklin, it was, of course, Thomas Jefferson who did it, but Franklin's fingerprints were all over it. The one thing that he may or may not have gotten right or wrong was, should the bird of the US have been the turkey as opposed to the eagle, but we can leave that aside. Turkeys taste better and they're kosher, so we're good that he didn't choose that. But in this idea of these attributes, I think speaks to that sort of above the fray aloofness of Franklin, which is that he really developed a keen understanding of how to live a life of meaningfulness and purpose. And because he lived an advanced number of years, especially for his generation, there was wisdom that we turn to. Now, the number 13 is an interesting number, depending who you ask. A lot of people, and I will share with you that on Saturday evening, my family and I took a quick trip up to Cocoa Beach to spend a few days at the end of spring break together. And my kids had never seen Apollo 13. And we were staying where we could actually see the NASA complex from the backyard of where we were staying. And so we showed Apollo 13 to them. They didn't like it. One of them did. The other two didn't like it so much. One refused to watch it. But there was a whole conversation about the number 13 and triskaidekaphobia and all of that. But 13 attributes has resonance. Margaret, you touched on an illusion. When I say 13 attributes, what do you think about?
Passover.
Why Passover?
We talk about the 13 attributes.
Where?
In the service. What do you mean, where in the service?
Yeah,
It's usually towards the end. I mean, in my Seder, we kind of use it, it's like a game.
Yeah. so Passover, but
What's the-
I think of their attributes, I think of the High Holy Days. Right, when we are beginning the Torah service, in all of the ritual regalia before we take the Torah out of the ark, alongside the recitation of Avinu Malkeinu, we also have the recitation of the 13 attributes of God. Adonai, El, Hanun, Barachum, Erech, Elohim, Rapesed. Those 13 attributes are also, when I think of 13, I think of those. And they come from the story of Moses after the golden calf episode, when he is really at an emotionally depressed state, when he is ready to give up on the enterprise of the Israelite undertaking, and God is saying, no, we have to go forward. And Moses asks God to see God's face. And God, of course, says, no, but I will pass before you and you can behold my backside and I'll put you in the cleft of the rock. And then Moses declares these 13 attributes. So there's some resonance of the 13 attributes, maybe, and I think we have to, what we know of the founders, and particularly, I think, Franklin and Jefferson, and to a degree Washington, less so Adams and the others. But there was definitely an awareness of the Mosaic tradition, if I can cite the way that Washington referred to the Jewish people in his letter to Touro Synagogue after he became president. There was knowledge of Yiddish, Franklin and Jefferson. So it's interesting to note that he would have chosen the 13, whether or not he was inspired by the Jewish notion of 13 attributes of God, might suggest that Franklin would see manliness akin to godliness, which wouldn't surprise me if he decided to frame it that way. It also wouldn't surprise me if Franklin thought himself as emulating God by cultivating 13 attributes of himself. I think that speaks to the ego of Benjamin Franklin. Well deserved. Okay. So Franklin lived until the late end of the 18th century, and his autobiography was written over a period from 1771 to 1790, meaning the stories that he told and the travels that he went on were collected there. Who really knows when each part was written? But it was around 1790 that the book was first published. And so that situates the period. A few things happened between 1771 and 1790 in the story of Benjamin Franklin and in the story of the American Republic. Right? Everything from the increasing of taxes by King George III, the onset of the revolutionary skirmishes in Lexington and Concord, the beginning of what became the Revolutionary War, the drafting and the passing of the Declaration of Independence, the War for Independence, that failed enterprise of the Articles of Confederation, and ultimately the drafting of the American Constitution, Franklin's role as serving as ambassador, right? He served as ambassador and was in France and helped to and helped to negotiate the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the Revolutionary War. And all of this is what some of the things that he wrote about in his autobiography, which include a rendition of these 13 virtues. Questions thus far? This is just a very, very brief high school history lesson where we are. All right. Was that over?
I said, not in my house.
Not in your high school, okay. Well, those Yankee rebels had a whole story. All right. So fast forward, or what population of American are Jewish?
Less than 2%.
Cities, certainly not New York, although there was a community there, but not the places that you think. But certainly Philadelphia as well, which was Franklin's sort of when he was home, his home. There was this other unique piece of Jewish life that had been around for a little while. Some of you may be familiar with the Mussar part of our tradition. Who's heard the word Mussar before? Hands up. Most everybody, not all, okay. Mussar has this interesting story from the perspective of a 21st century American Jew. Until the late 20th century, Mussar was considered to be this very esoteric thing that only certain nudniks did on the side. It was not really part of any mainstream Jewish community, in part because it was not where Jews who spent a lot of their time studying, what's the word for Jews spend a lot of their time studying? Orthodox Jews, right? Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, Haredi Jews, the Jews that you might not find in this particular synagogue, but are friends in our community, right? Where they are, a lot of their focus in learning is they're studying Talmud, and a lot of their focus, and I mean this as an observation, not as an aspersion, so please don't take it as one. Much of the focus of their learning, if it has practical implication, by that I mean, most of the study that Jews of that ilk are doing is not intended to have practical implication. To learn. It's for the sake of, it's for its own sake. There is this beautiful phrase in our tradition, Torah lishma, right? Torah, the word describing not only the 5 books of Moses, but really all the collection of Jewish wisdom. So Torah lishma, the study of Torah lishma, who knows what the word Shem means in Hebrew? Name, right? Torah lishma is a phrase that means Torah to or for its own name. Torah for its own sake. Torah lishma is studying Torah just for the purposes of studying Torah, right? If you're cracking open the section about Pesach to get ready for Pesach, that's not Torah lishma. It's with a purpose. Also good, also important. But if you happen to be reading the rules about how you build a kosher mikvah during the week of Pesach, that's Torah lishma, because it's the next page in the book. And so there's obviously a lot of Torah lishma happening throughout the last 500 years of Jewish life. But there was also practical learnings as well. A lot of that practical learning was focused on halakha. What are the ways that Jews are supposed to behave? How are we supposed to make a mikvah? How do I kosher my house for Pesach? Is this a sukkah or not? Is this food kosher to eat or not? Those deeply practical implications. May you and how might you extinguish a flame on a stove during the intermediate days of Yom Tov? Or if it is the beginning or last day of Pesach, can I extinguish a flame that is on my stove? And what more medieval technology, like a burning fire of logs, which the Talmud does talk about, how might that be a parallel to the idea of a gas-powered stove that has a cutoff valve, just as one example? That is deeply, potentially deeply practical Jewish learning, that if you want to live an observant lifestyle, you gotta know these things. You gotta know how I can operate my kitchen or not during the days of Pesach. Mussar was deeply practical study for how to live a virtuous life. And so it was thought to be very, very, very esoteric, sometimes almost negatively so, because it had this sort of connotation that you weren't doing it right. Because it went far beyond the practical implications, which is where most folks spent their limited time to, because they also didn't have that much time to study, because they had, jobs and lives and things to do. But in the last 100 years, or in the last 50 years, there has been a deep revival in the study of Mussar, because there are a lot of Jews, some of whom are committed to an observant lifestyle, some of whom are not. We are on this table are in the not category in that particular, but we are all committed to Jewish life in a deep, meaningful way, have said, wait a minute. I may not be worried about what kind of kashrut I have in my kitchen, but as a Jewish person, I am deeply motivated to live a virtuous life. And I am deeply interested in studying what our tradition says, inspired by words in the 5 books of Moses, inspired by the teachings of our prophets, inspired by the writings in the Hebrew Bible, inspired by the Midrash and the Mishnah and the Talmud. What does our tradition say about how I behave, especially towards other people, alongside my concern about living Jewishly in sort of ritual and practice ways? And so there has been a deep revival in Mussar study, and organizations that are out there. I'm finding myself trying to bathe as much as possible. I'm teaching Mussar to our teenagers right now. I will tell you that I've learned something very meaningful, which is it's really hard to teach Mussar to 8th graders. They are not in a Mussar mindset, so much so that we're giving up on the enterprise. And we're using the same learning to put it to 11th and 12th graders for next year, because they are in a much better place to think about it. But there's a lot, I think, that we can learn from it. So we are going to be studying in this class over the next 4 weeks, a really interesting collection of Mussar-inspired writings called Cheshbon HaNefesh, which I'll introduce in a moment. Okay. Let's start, though, with the Franklin, because it comes before Cheshbon HaNefesh. So what are these 13 attributes that Franklin suggests? The names of virtues with their precepts were, and this is a quotation right out of the Autobiography: temperance, eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. Silence, speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Order, let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Resolution, resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. We'll stop right here. These are really straightforward, really simple, and deeply meaningful and powerful, because they are simple and challenging to accomplish. All of these sit, what I like is he sort of puts them, most of them in that there are two polarities, and that we find ourselves somewhere in the middle of those poles. And we are always striving to strike a balance, right? Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation, right? On the other end, we could have complete abstinence, but that doesn't seem to be the American way, or the Franklin-esque way, or, by the way, the Jewish way, right? We are not a people that exercise abstinence. We are people of moderation. More virtues. Frugality. Make no expense, but to do good to others or yourself. Ipso, waste nothing. Industry, lose no time, be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. I can't help but notice the parallel between industry and silence. Use your words, use your time effectively, and if they're not effective, don't use them. Sincerity, use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Justice, wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Treat others as you prefer to be treated. That which is hateful to you, don't do to others. Skip a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here we go. Moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. Cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. Note the late 18th century spelling in some of these words. Tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. Chastity. Rarely use venery, but for health or offspring. Never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. Beautiful.
I don't know what that means. I know what it means.
Okay, Margaret says she doesn't know what venery means. She thinks she knows what it means. It is what you think it means.
Sex.
Sending this list to Washington.
What's that? I am not. It's already there in the Library of Congress. Can't make them listen to me. I'm not sending it anywhere. This is the one where I would say, Franklin, if you would be so kind to be a little more inclusive. Humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates. I might add a third name. Moses, right? So did Jesus and so did Socrates, by the way. But if you remember the story of Moses' call, when God called upon him to be a prophet, what was his answer? I don't have the skill set. I don't have the skill set.
You should have real lot.
So these 13 attributes, temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility, are the 13 attributes that Franklin suggests in his autobiography, and then he gives a bit of a descriptor. My intention in being to acquire the habitude of all these virtues, I judged it would be well not to distract my attention by attempting the whole at once, but to fix on one of them at a time, and when I should be master of that, then proceed to another, and so on, till I should have gone through the 13. Pause right there. This is where I wish we knew more about what Franklin was thinking and what he knew about what. Because what he is describing, the idea of having a list of virtues that we want to, that are our axioms and our maxims and our goals, but focusing on cultivating one at a time, while not disrupting or disregarding the others, but having an intentionality of one, comes potentially straight out of the Mussar tradition. That the core practice of Mussar is focusing on developing one midah, which is the Hebrew word for a virtue, at a given time. And Franklin has come either to the same conclusion by his own accord, or perhaps inspired by them, and then creating a rotation between them. And as the previous acquisition of some might facilitate the acquisition of certain others, I arrange them with that view as they stand above. Temperance first, as it lends to procure that coolness and clearness of head, which is so necessary where constant vigilance was to be kept up, and guard maintained against the unremitting attraction of ancient habits, bad habits, and the force of perpetual temptations. This being acquired and established, silence would be more easy. And my desire to bring to gain knowledge at the same time that I improved in virtue, and considering that in conversation, it was obtained rather by the use of the ears than of the tongue. And therefore wishing to break a habit I was getting into of prattling, punning, and joking, which only made me acceptable to trifling company, I gave silence the second place. All right. So as we see, Franklin is suggesting that we have these 13 virtues and they're set in a particular order. And the idea is you cultivate one for a while and then you move on to the next. Everybody with me so far? Shannon.
At the time this was written, who was like, do you know who would have been the intended audience? I know it's not us.
Well-
I know it's not us women, but I'm just wondering,
Well,
like, who?
So I don't think it's necessarily a gender thing when it comes to Franklin. Right? If I'm Ben Franklin, well, the entire world could benefit from my wisdom. And he published this in his autobiography. It takes a certain lack of humility to publish an autobiography. Right? It takes a certain purpose and ego to say, I have things that y'all should know. And y'all's lives would be better if you would learn from my wisdom. Right? You know, and what's interesting, and I'll sort of jump ahead for a second, is in the study of Mussar that I'm doing with our teens, when they lay out one of the virtues, they usually lay out 4 different expressions. A deep, potentially dangerous dearth of the virtue, a sort of normal lack of the virtue, hitting the virtue right on the head, and then actually having too much of the virtue. And most people, when they live their lives, fall between having the right amount of the virtue and having a little bit too little. That the sort of normal human experience is somewhere in the middle. So for example, I will use the virtue of chesed as an example. I'm going to pull up some notes if you don't mind. So chesed, can someone remind us what chesed means? So loving kindness is often how it's translated, especially if we include the phrase gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. So the way that the Mussar tradition lays out this idea of kindness is that doing nice things for others is regular kindness, and it's right in the middle. But chesed, from the Mussar perspective, is kindness that requires you to put yourself out to do this act of kindness. It's a going above and beyond. So you're walking down the street and you see someone drop their wallet, and you pick up the wallets and you pick up your pace a few steps and you find them at the corner or even the next block and you return their wallet to them. Is that an act of kindness?
Yes.
Of course it is.
Let's take the cash out first.
Well, you take the cash out first, now we're at the other end of things. But that would not, in the sort of Mussar way of looking at things, that would not qualify as Mussar kindness. Because you didn't do enough to make it happen. Years ago, and by that I mean somewhere probably 1990, 1991, my dad, who's a surgeon, would keep his appointments, all of his procedures in a written calendar book. And one day, he put his calendar book on the roof of his car, and he drove away. And the calendar book went for it. We've all done that before. Right? I've done it with shoes. I didn't do it with my phone ever, thank God. But you gotta put yourself, in 1990, that was his whole livelihood was in that book. Yes, his office has at a point, but information sharing was analog. And so he was very much flying without a net for a few weeks. And then one day, his calendar book showed up in the mail. Because a postal worker picked it up. And I don't know exactly the whole story, but found out who it was, found out where he lived, and had the calendar book returned to him. That is chesed.
That's it.
That is chesed, right? When you're going way above and beyond to help someone in a moment and to provide a need for them, that like, it's too much, you went too far, right? Then there's an act of chesed that goes beyond, which is you're actually harming yourself to help somebody else. And the Mussar tradition would say that's actually too much as well. You don't need to harm yourself. You just need to put yourself out in a way that is easy for you to recover from. So that is how Mussar thinks about these various virtues, these various midot that we are undertaking. And so throughout the tradition over the last several hundred years, various thinkers, mostly rabbis, mostly men, but not exclusively, have written about what are these midot and how might they manifest. And in 1812, within a generation of the life of Ben Franklin and a generation of the publication of his autobiography in English in the States, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Lefin of Satanov in Poland published in Lemberg a collection called Cheshbon HaNefesh, a work on the Mussar tradition. Anyone heard the phrase Cheshbon HaNefesh before?
Yeah.
Where does that resonate from? Also from the High Holy Days. Cheshbon HaNefesh, translated as accounting of the soul, is that work that we do beginning on the first day of Elul, through Slichot, into Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we look back on the year that was, we think about what were the things that we did well that we want to repeat, what are the things that we wish we had done differently, and ask ourselves, how can we make amends for the things that we did wrong? How can we make apologies for the things that we did wrong? How can we be better friends to other people, including offering forgiveness for their wrongs? How can we do this act of self-improvement in the year to come? And that introspection that we do during the holiday season is referred to as Cheshbon HaNefesh, accounting of the soul, or an account of the soul. In modern Hebrew, Cheshbon is, among other things, the words for a receipt, right? Or the check or the bill. You're sitting at a restaurant, you've enjoyed a delicious dinner, and you would like to pay the bill. You ask the Mussar or the Mussarit, the waiter or the waitress, for the Cheshbon. Cheshbon b'vakasha. And they bring up the Cheshbon, which tells you how many shekels you owe, and you should tip 10% when you're in Israel. That is the hard and fast standard. That's how they do that. All right. So the translation that we're going to be looking at of Cheshbon HaNefesh was published in 2023 by Feldheim Publishing, and Rabbi Shlomo Silverstein was the one who wrote the translation. Just giving credit to where credit is due, because I pulled these translations out of a collection. The entire collection of Cheshbon HaNefesh is available on Sefaria. Who's familiar with Sefaria? Some of you maybe. Sefaria is now in its second decade, and it is an online collection of striving at the entirety of Jewish learning. It's a website, it's an app, it has the texts in their original Hebrew, it has many of them in translation, although not all, some of which were done, were done by individual contributors. There have been people who have purchased the rights to a whole translation. So there is about 10, 15 years ago, a publishing house in Israel called Koren worked with Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. Rabbi Steinsaltz, of blessed memory, his life's work was an entire translation of the entire Talmud, not only from the ancient Aramaic into modern Hebrew, but also into English. And a family purchased the rights and I think paid him for that English translation. It's available in publication, but it was also then added to Sefaria. So you can access the entire English translation of the Talmud on Sefaria just like that. Thank you, Rashina. And here is the beauty of an online collection. All of the texts are hyperlinked to each other. So you open up Genesis 1:1, and you can pull next to it all of the commentary from all the medieval commentaries, all of the Rashi and all of the Ibn Ezra and all of them, all of those commentaries. And in them, they cite other verses from Torah and other midrashim, and just with click by click by click, you can link them together. What may have taken my colleagues 50 years ago 3 hours to get from here to there, I can do in 3 clicks. They're very jealous of us. And they show their jealousy on our online chat rooms where they wonder why we don't spend enough time looking things up, where they had to spend hours poring over books. And I say to them, you didn't have email, you didn't have texts, you didn't have WhatsApp, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have Twitter. We are busying ourselves in Torah in other ways. Thank you very much. We are working just as hard as you were, just different. All right. So I mentioned before, what is Mussar? This is a poll from an article on myjewishlearning.com, another great online resource of Jewish learning. Mussar is a Jewish spiritual practice, and I want to note that. I note the framing that these ideas of working on your interpersonal activity, working on how you treat each other, is a spiritual practice. It is meant to connect yourself with the rest of humanity and the Holy One. It is my particular flavor of spiritual practice. With apologies who want to spend their time connecting with the Holy One, being deep in meditation, not for me. I do it occasionally. This is my spiritual practice. That gives concrete instructions on how to live a meaningful and ethical life. It arose as a response to this concern. Mussar is virtue-based ethics, based on the idea that cultivating inner virtues, we improve ourselves. It is contrast with most Jewish ethical teachings, which are rule-based. Today, a number of people who do not follow traditional Jewish rules and rituals are attracted to Mussar because it offers opportunities for personal transformation through a Jewish lens. Does that resonate with anybody in the room? Raise your hand. Not following the Jewish traditional rules, wanting to live a Jewish life meaningfully? Mussar masters recognize that simply learning about kindness does not make us more kind. Moreover, they understood that our inner drives, wounds, and appetites often manifest as the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, actively preventing us from behaving as we know that we should. We know what we're supposed to do, and yet we don't do it. With whom does that resonate? You're lying, you're doing it right now. You don't want to show that you make bad decisions, but we all make bad decisions because we have this Yetzer Hara. I really shouldn't have that second glass of wine. I really shouldn't have that fourth cookie, right? The Yetzer Hara was well described beautifully in that beautiful 1980s Alka-Seltzer commercial. Can't believe I ate the whole thing. That's the Yetzer Hara in a very, very easy way to understand without offering harm to anybody else. But we've all done it to ourselves, let alone things that we do to other people. One of the great Mussar teachers, Rabbi Lefin, described Mussar as teaching the heart what the mind already understands. I know I'm not supposed to. I'm tempted to do it anyway, in a way that I can cultivate the discipline to do the things I know I'm supposed to do, and not to do things I'm not supposed to do, is you actually have to practice. You have to do it with intentionality. This is why I said that I think that Franklin very well may have been aware of this, because the approach of not trying to be temperate and moderate and silent and ordered all at once, but the little by little, a bit at a time, is very much key to the Mussar practice. Is you have all of these things that we know we're supposed to do, but we're only working on one at a time. All right. Now that we are 40 minutes into the class, we are ready to learn some Mussar. And I'm going to begin with the opening story in Cheshbon HaNefesh, obviously presented in translation. A parable about 2 businessmen. This is from Cheshbon HaNefesh. The first is wealthy and wise, and already we are in Ben Franklin land. Right? What is one of Ben Franklin's most famous aphorisms? Early to bed, early to wise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Right? I am, by the way, even though he doesn't allude to Franklin directly in his work, there is no question that specifically these 13 attributes from Ben Franklin informed Rabbi Lefin in his creation of Cheshbon HaNefesh. He chose those 13 virtues in Franklin's approach to talk about. So we have a man who is wealthy and wise, accomplishing his work quickly because he goes to bed early. He lives at a time and a place where his merchandise brings him considerable profits, and there is a great deal of demand. He spends day and night filling his warehouse with goods and then emptying it for deliveries to his customers. He sees his pockets filling with gold coins from his profits, builds new storehouses so that he can fill them with even more goods, and has no time whatsoever to make any accounting. How much you describe this person?
Rich.
He's rich. He's disorganized.
Someone does, just the only thing he has, but he is.
Say that, Margaret?
The only thing he does, he has nothing else, it's just constantly with the work and money.
Well, so he's got a lot of work to do because he's got so many orders to fill. It takes up so much of his days.
He has no time to be kind.
He may or may not have time left over, although I will assure you that's not the purpose of the setup. Right, this is not meant to be a judgment of what he's not doing. It's just describing a man who, for whatever reason, whether it's his luck or his intuition, finds himself doing a business that he just has more demand than he possibly could have imagined. Money is coming in hand over fist. He got extraordinarily lucky in choosing this particular endeavor, that he has no need to develop any particular business acumen because his margins are so fat, he's able to navigate any inefficiencies in his business model. Okay? No judgments. We can all think of people who, not because they were particularly shrewd business people, but just because they had something that was good that they just have more demand than they can possibly have imagined. So when I was in college, I had the opportunity to spend a week at a leadership program sponsored by my fraternity. The money was donated by a guy named John Huntsman Sr. You ever heard of John Huntsman?
Yes.
Who's John Huntsman?
Was he a senator from Vermont?
So, close, Utah. So his son, John Huntsman Jr., was governor of Vermont and had aspirations for higher office. But it was the father, John Huntsman Sr., that was the person who is the one I'm talking about, who made in millions of dollars, right? A very, very wealthy man. Because John Huntsman Sr. invented the polystyrene egg crate.
Oh.
Polystyrene egg crate. Okay? A very simple idea. And he fell, and he was a devout Mormon, I apologize for the language, he fell ass backwards into money. Because he created something that everybody needed. It was simple, it was cheap to make, and he sold it around the world, and he made a ton of money. He was very philanthropic. The Huntsman Cancer Institute was a huge philanthropy in Utah, did a lot of good things with his money, but it wasn't like he grinded it out and went to business school to fair. He just had a really good idea that made him a ton of money that he would not have anticipated when he had this idea, but it was an idea. That's this businessman. And by the way, John was healthy and wise.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's the use of the term accounting.
Yeah,
Is accounting meant as being accountable, or is it accounting as far as managing your business?
managing the business. He doesn't worry, he doesn't have to worry about, am I gonna make payroll? There's just so much money coming in. His incomes far outstrip his expenses. He's got more than enough to go around. Right? He's got that much coming in. Right? That's why this is without judgment. He just is making so much money, he doesn't even know what to do with it. And faces none of the problems that most businesses have of trying to manage a business well. The second businessman is poor, intellectually as well as financially. He lives at a time and a place where his merchandise has little demand, and thus there is little profit. He is beset by constant worry and doubt as to whether his income will offset his expenses. Because he has no other source of sustenance, he and his family are in danger of starving to death. Right? The opposite. His stuff don't sell. And if your stuff don't sell, it's going to be very, very difficult for you. He has no choice but to maintain a careful accounting of his records, and he is therefore constantly checking his ledgers. And indeed, he has the time to do so, because what is he not doing? Filling orders. Right. By doing so, he can see which of his merchandise is most in demand, and when it will bring him the greatest profits. His analysis and appraisals enable him to determine which type of merchandise should be bought and sold. He spends a day and a night planning new marketing strategies designed to increase his profits, as well as maintaining constant close supervision over his income and expenses. He does this for at least a year, and then reviews his balance sheet to examine his profit margin. Understanding that his careful accounting and close supervision alleviated the worry and fears that he faced, he continues to follow in this practice in the following years as well. Thus, Bezrat Hashem, with God's help, he is able to earn a substantial and comfortable living. The moral of this parable, sorry for the typo on the word of, although it's spelled phonetically, of this parable will, in Yitzhak Hashem, with God's help, be explained in this work. Somebody please explain to me the parable.
So far, what it means.
This is it. This is the end of the parable.
There's
Fran.
there's more than one way to get to a better place.
So one truth of this is, at the end of the parable, both men find themselves feeling successful. And there are different approaches to it. Great, that's a piece of it.
I found this in my own business.
Okay.
When things are going well, is not the time to just appreciate what's coming in and just absorb it, but also when things are going well, you still need to be planning for the future. You still need to be planning for the time when things are rough.
Yeah.
Because without that, your business will die, because no thing lasts forever.
Right, so you're actually combining the two stories in the parable, which is to say that, but I think the wisdom you're sharing with us, I think it's good wisdom, is that the first person in the parable should have used the skills and the approach of the second one, that especially when times were good, to really fine tune the business, to maximize the good it was doing, and also prepare you for the ups and downs that naturally come with business. Now, the problem with that approach in the parable is that first guy, lucky as can be, never had a down year. Right? This is a made up story, but he never needed to cultivate those skills because he never had a down year. But of course, it's a parable, so it's meant to create this dichotomy to highlight the difference. Absolutely. Rabban.
I hope I don't offend you, but of course I was trying to relate it to Tesla and Edison, in which Tesla in idea was so creative.
Nikolai or the new company? Which Tesla? The original Tesla, Nikolai the inventor?
Nicholas Tesla.
Okay.
His idea is what Edison used to get rich, while Tesla died poor.
Right. Right. Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Spencer.
To add on, I think polystyrene egg crates, make them out of better materials, that means like less harm to the environment.
So that is, over the years, that iterated, right? We went from polystyrene being used in the 70s and 80s, right? Spencer, you're probably too young to remember this, but I think the rest of us in this room can remember that McDonald's used to serve all of its meals in polystyrene, right? Because they're really good at insulating, they kept the food warm. But then we learned that polystyrene is really, really bad for the environment. And so they moved away from polystyrene, and now they serve most of their meals in paper, which is biodegradable, right? So over the years, we've moved away from polystyrene, and probably it's cardboard and other things, and technology have changed. But by that point, Huntsman had made his billions before we knew how bad it was. And this is a business story and not an environmental justice story, right?
Right.
I look at it a little different.
Yeah,
The first businessman did it without God. He's godless. The
Mm,
second guy needed God,
Mm.
because without God, he wouldn't succeed.
So. Okay, so whether God is the one blessing the first man and cursing the second one, or the blessing comes not from the abundance, but from the wisdom that the man cultivated with God's help? Yeah. Yeah.
God's help.
But
In other words, if God wasn't.
what does Lefin say twice at the end? With God's help, he's able to earn a substantial and comfortable living, right? Because wisdom comes from God's help, for sure, for sure. Spencer, and then I have one more comment.
What I was trying to say was, he didn't look at alternative ways to do better by his customers and people, he just kept making money.
Right. So I'm a baseball fan, I was a baseball player growing up, and there's a particular baseball parable that I think is very similar to this, that I think about. I think most of you know that a batter, once they hit the ball, has to run to first base. Everyone's familiar with that element of baseball. Okay, this is that's the only baseball you need to know to understand this parable. If you have two players on your team, one of whom has perfect form in terms of running form, and one of whom has terrible form, and they both run to first base at the same speed, and you can only pick one of them, which one do you want on your team?
Perfect form.
Some say perfect form.
Either one, if there is.
Either one, Dave's either one.
I would say the other one.
Why?
because he's working harder to get there.
He's working harder to get there.
Who gets better?
Doesn't matter, it's not the point, right? I will, with my wisdom, I promise you, I will get to the World Series before you. Susan was close. She has the right answer for the wrong reason. The player that you want is the one with the terrible form. Because if he can run to first base at the same speed as the guy with perfect form, imagine how fast he'll be when you teach him the right form.
Right.
And he will then gain a competitive advantage. The first one in the parable of the two businessmen, the first guy is the one who runs to first base with perfect form already. He got lucky. He's got everything he needs, and he isn't interested in improving himself. But the second guy can improve himself. And if you were to put them together, if you were to take this parable and take the approach to personal development that the second businessman had taken, imagine how much more riches that first businessman would have had. But he didn't worry about it because he was able to coast on his wide margins. He could have made more. And he could have used that more to do more good in the world, while keeping his own pockets just as deep as they were before. And that's the way I think Lefin wants us to think. But it's the approach that actually is the key to this teaching. How long did it take for this businessman to develop the skill set he needed to even get from losing money to breaking even?
Well, a day and a night.
A year. He spends day and night working, and he says he does this for at least a year. And then he examines his profit margin, and then he revisits all of the decisions that he did, right? He revisited his merchandising strategy. He revisited his marketing strategy. He revisited his all the things, and every year he's tightening and clicking and changing, and he's able to grow into a substantial and comfortable living. He didn't do it once. He did it on constant repeats. He didn't do everything all at once. He focused on individual pieces of his business at a time. And over a year, and then 2, and then 5, and then 10, he was able to develop the outcome that he was hoping, just like Ben Franklin would have wanted him to. Margaret.
He's got the second one who works so hard.
Yeah.
He becomes a more complete human being.
Yes.
Whereas the other guy's just raking it in, no time to do anything. There's no development.
You know, I would say there's no opportunity for personal growth because there's no need. What is the mother of all invention? Necessity. The first guy has no necessity. The second guy has necessity. And so to throw into the inventor category of Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, and Ben Franklin for that matter, we have our businessman who by necessity has to develop a new way of doing his business for his family to survive. In Cheshbon HaNefesh, after this introductory parables of the things, then Lefin introduces 13 attributes, which he calls Menachem HaNefesh, or equanimity. Menachem HaNefesh can best be translated as restfulness of the soul. Savlanut, which can be patience or toleration. Seder, which means order. Haritzut, decisiveness. Nikiyut, cleanliness. Anava, humility. Tzedek, righteousness. Kimutz, frugality. Zerizut, zeal. Shtika, silence. Nichuta, calmness. Emet, truth. And preshut, separation. Is it a one-to-one?
Close.
Close is the right answer. It is a close one-to-one. Some of them are the same. Some of them are sort of the same ideas phrased differently. And some are actually not so much in alignment with each other.
You need to find separation.
So, yes, I can and we will, but it's the idea of keeping things in their right category, right? It's probably similar to order. And I'll leave it at that. Right? Because what we're gonna spend time is, we're not gonna get through all 13 of them, because you can see this go on for a while, but we're gonna explore, you know, the depth of the Franklin text are those one-sentence descriptors. And there's a chapter on each of these in Cheshbon HaNefesh, so we're gonna compare how Lefin thinks about these ideas with the way that Franklin frames them for us to think about. But I wanna show you here how I would compare these and how others have. So temperance is like nichuta, calmness. Silence, shtika, we see that in both. We see order, seder in both. We see resolution and decisiveness. There's a good comparison there. Frugality is in both. Industry, zeal, similarity there. Sincerity, emet, truth. Justice, tzedek, sure. Righteousness, yeah. Moderation, toleration, savlanut. We'll talk about how those are connected. Tranquility is equanimity, menachem HaNefesh. Chastity is preshut, separation. Doing the things you're not supposed to do, not doing the things you're not supposed to do, only doing the things that you're supposed to do and only at the right time and place. Chastity is big on that. And humility, anava, we see in both. Now, here is the way that Franklin described how he did his 13 attribute practice. He talks so plain. I made a little book in which I allotted a page for each of the virtues. I ruled each page with red ink so as to have 7 columns, one for each day of the week, marking each column with a letter for the day. I crossed these columns with 13 red lines, marking the beginning of each line with the first letter of one of the virtues, on which line and in its proper column, I might mark by a little black spot every fault I found upon examination to have been committed respecting the virtue upon that day. So Franklin kept a list of his demerits. How did I not act with temperance today? Curious to see his chastity list. And whatever else was there. I determined to give a week strict attention to each of the virtues successively. Thus, in my first week, my great guard was to avoid the very least offense against temperance, leaving the other virtues for their ordinary chance, only marking every evening my faults of the day. I could go through a course complete with 13 weeks and 4 courses in a year. And like him who, having a garden to weed, does not attempt to eradicate all the bad herbs at once, which would exceed his reach and his strength, but works on one bed at a time, and having accomplished the first, proceeds to the second. So I should have the encouraging pleasure of seeing my pages on my pages the progress I made in virtue. And this is what his book looked like. So during the temperance week, this is what he was working on. Good for him that he didn't have a lack of temperance, he had issues of order and silence. But in his week of temperance, he was good at temperance. Spencer?
Historically, he's lying on a bunch of this.
Of course he is.
I
Franklin.
mean, especially chastity.
I know, because he was known to be bad about that.
No, really.
When I saw that was the mark.
One of his great aphorisms was do as I say, not as I do. He's showing us his little book. And I want to show you the little book that Rabbi Lefin wrote in Cheshbon HaNefesh.
Just backwards in Hebrew.
It says the exact same thing, right? Remazim, the hints, the midot. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, the top line. What does that stand for?
BCD.
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. Then down the right column are the names of all of the midot. Right, we've got Nechuta, Savlanut, Seder, Haritzut, Nikiyut, Anavat, Tzedek, Kimut, Zirizut, Shtika, Nechuta is the first one, sorry. Oh, Menuchat is the first one, Menachem HaNefesh. Emet is the second to bottom, and then Prishut is the last one.
So he had to make a page like this for every week,
Yeah.
every week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the class disagreed.
And he would mark off, just in the same way.
He didn't show us what his was on.
All right. So we're gonna do a brief, and we're past time, just to give you a little taste to think about how you might work on moderation, toleration, savlanut over the next week. Franklin said, avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. And Lefin says, when something bad happens to you and you did not have the power to avoid it, do not aggravate the situation even more through waste grief. I will end with the story how that happened to me this weekend. We went up to Cocoa Beach this weekend. We chose to go there because we liked it there. And after we chose to go there, we learned that there were 2 launches scheduled for Sunday from Cape Canaveral. And the kids were thrilled. And 4 days before we left, the first of the launches was canceled. And then the second launch on Sunday was on schedule, scheduled for 3 o'clock. 2 o'clock rolls around, they push the launch back to 4. 4 o'clock rolls around, they push the launch back to 6. 5 o'clock rolls around, they push the launch back to 7. 6 o'clock rolls around, they push the launch to Monday. And my daughters were quite disappointed. They are not yet old enough to know how to do this. But what we tried to teach them was, it's out of our control. It's out of your control. You can feel upset by it, but don't aggravate the situation through more waste grief, especially, and this is good for a child, by acting out in response to the grief that you're feeling and causing more things to have grief for after the fact. Work on your savlanut, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.